Alright, new one.
Alright, so this is going to be somewhat of a demonstration of some Paleolithic cave painting techniques, because when most people see like a hand, they think that the handprints in the cave painting, they think they just covered up their hands and then did this. That's not exactly true. In fact, cave painting had a lot of different techniques, and one of them, and I think is this one's not talked enough about, is the spit spray technique, which they would take, either they're just raw mouths, they would just like, and spit on directly onto the wall, or they would take a hollow bone, like they would take a bone, they hollowed it out to make a straw, and then spit directly onto the cave wall with their pigments. And they would often do this with a stencil technique. And a stencil is basically, it's a printmaking technique where you cut out what you want colored, and so everything, it's used in spray painting often. In cave painting, they would take a piece of leather and just cut one singular hole into it, then move on it, and that's how you get the dots. If you ever look up some cave painting of horses, they have spots on them. That's how they did that. I did a different one for convenience sake, and because this one's rather small, so I don't have a piece of leather. Instead, I got this. It also makes it able that I can repeat this. So, guess I'll demonstrate that now. I'm using a mix of charcoal and water that I gathered up earlier. So, I would go like this. Not necessarily a clean method, or very effective in my case, but it got something done, and I'll touch that up with ink. Yeah, not necessarily clean, but I'm wearing casual clothing. Bleh. Okay, so that didn't work out as well as I would like it to. And I've completely lost which way we're going.
I must have been going with this streets down.
And it was somewhat right here, so I'll use just the second stenciling technique they used, which was using paintbrushes. They had paintbrushes back then. They made them out of animal furs and sticks or bones. So typically, if they wanted to stencil something, they would just do this. Exact same way like others want to stencil it. Should've got a smaller brush. But it works pretty much the same. We didn't exactly get rid of any painting techniques from our Paleolithic days. We just added on more things like computers and other stuff, but in general, we haven't exactly lost any techniques, except maybe the spit one. But that was just replaced with spray cans and stuff. It's essentially a spray can, except you're using your lungs. And my lungs are not like a aerosol can, so here we go. Just gonna dress it up a bit with some ink. That works out. Just clean it up a bit. Now, they used all sorts of techniques for each painting. It's like, if they wanted a straight line, they would use a stick, or a pen, or a paintbrush. They wanted something colored in, they would use this airbrush technique. Or if they wanted something stenciled. Now, I chose this shape in particular because it's actually going off a theory that is out there. So, the constellation Taurus is pretty old. It's from the Babylon, but there's a theory out there, and it's a pretty old one, that the constellation actually was recognized by our Paleolithic ancestors. And that certain cave drawings were in fact star charts of it. That makes the constellation Taurus around 17,000 years old, at least. So, that's what this is. The dots for the constellation of Taurus. And here is a rendition of a bowl, a really thick necked bowl. I'll make it fatter in the back. A little spot. And connect him there. But yeah, that's essentially what some cave paintings were. Some were just maybe for religious, there's a lot of theories for cave paintings. They're for religious purposes, for hunting purposes, documentation, or in some theories is that some were star charts, and specifically of the constellation of Taurus, for it to be recognized as a bowl. Alright, so the second stenciling technique, this one's much simpler than spitting onto a surface with some pigment in the mouth, which they would use more than just charcoal. They would use all sorts of pigments for these things, and there's actually a lot of theories suggesting that the first mining projects done by humanity wasn't to get any metals or anything, it was to get ochre. Specifically red ochre, because that is found everywhere in Paleolithic sites and on cave painting walls, but you need to mine for it because it's in clay. So, the idea is that they first started our mining projects to get ochre. So, the first miners were artists, essentially. So here's the second stenciling technique, and this one's pretty simple. Just take your hand, you draw around it with a pigment. I'm using oil paint, but they would have used ochre. They would also use the spit technique on their hands, and that's typically how that went. But they also did do this, or use the charcoal sticks. And I'm using my non-dominant hand, and from my experience in trying to recreate this is probably what aligns all cave painting handprints and non-dominant hands. Because it is way more simple to make a stencil of your non-dominant, but they could have also made their dominant hands. We're not totally certain. So they would make a stencil by covering it up, and boom. And that's how you get a cave painting drawing of sorts. There was some techniques of it. So yeah.